just give the usual warnings to members and members of the public about electronic devices. Phones and that should be switched off, and as in relation to members, just the usual advice about the tablets and their use. And also invite members to declare any interests which are relevant to the issues being discussed at today's meeting. Moving on to apologies, there is an apology from Jim Allister.
Yep.
I said the chair will be late, should be here fairly soon, and I don't think we have any other apologies. So moving on to draft minutes from the 14th of May are page 5 of members' meeting packs, and I just ask members if they're content with the minutes from the 14th of May as drafted.
Agreed.
And draft minutes from the 19th of May are page 3 of the tabled items, and just ask members if they're content with the minutes from the 19th of May.
Agreed.
In relation to chairperson's business, the chair and Roy Beggs represented the committee at the Assembly Community Connect dinner event on Tuesday 19th of May at Social Enterprise NI. And moving on to matters arising, refer members to correspondence from the Ad Hoc Committee on the Public Services Ombuds person NIPSO bill and Schedule 3 of the bill at page 11 of your meeting packs. And just remind members that the Ad Hoc Committee would welcome any views the Committee for Social Development has on the proposed bill. At its last meeting, the Committee agreed to forward any comments in the bill to the Clerk by noon yesterday, and also advise members that as no comments have been received, Committee staff have drafted a response to that effect. It can be found on page 6 of the tabled items. So just ask members if they're content with the responses drafted.
Agreed.
The next item on the agenda is the Department Business Plan 2015-16. The following departmental officials are here to brief the committee on the Departmental Business Plan 2015-2016. Ian Snowden, Brian Doherty, Tracy Maharg and Deborah Brown. So just ask you to come forward. And I would refer members to the department's paper on page 20 of your meeting packs. Just ask officials to brief the committee, and thanks very much for coming.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to present the Department's business plan for 2015-16 and to answer any questions that the committee members might have on it. I'm joined today by 3 other senior officials from the Department. So I have Tracy Maharg, who's the Deputy Secretary for the Urban Regeneration and Community Development Group, Brian Doherty, who's a Director of the Social Security Agency, and Deborah Brown, the Department's Director of Financial Management. By way of background and context, the Department's work is closely linked to the priorities of the Programme for Government, and those priorities are reflected in the key themes of the Department's corporate plan, which are around housing, welfare reform and strengthened communities and vibrant urban areas. The Executive has decided to extend the Programme of Government for 1 year to March 2016, and the Department's business plan for this year, 2015-16, therefore carries forward those key themes of the corporate plan for 1 additional year over the same timescale. The business plan sets out our commitments for the year ahead and the associated milestones and targets, which will contribute to our overall mission of together tackling disadvantage and building sustainable communities. The business plan acknowledges that the Department is facing a very challenging year ahead for 3 main reasons. First, the Department's budget for this year is £63 million less than in 2014-15, which is a cut of 9.7% overall. Second, the Department is engaged in 3 major reform programmes in the 4 biggest areas of the Department's work. That's the welfare system, social housing, child maintenance service and urban regeneration and community development. So the committee will be familiar with these reform programmes and a lot of the complexities associated with them. And third, the department itself is going through a change process with the creation of the new Department for Communities in May 2016. And a huge amount of work is being undertaken in relation to that at the minute. The challenge we face in the department is to ensure that we continue to deliver business as usual in the form of quality services to the people and communities in Northern Ireland whilst we're going through all these challenging change processes. If the committee is content, what we propose to do is begin by updating you on the top priorities for 2015-16, which are outlined on page 1 of the business plan. And we will then take any questions that the members may have on individual issues that arise in it. So I'm going to start off by covering pardon me, housing reform and the child maintenance service and people issues, and then I will start off on the reform of local government as it affects the Urban Regeneration Community Development Group, as I've been involved in those issues in the committee. Tracy will pick up on the operational impacts of that, and also then talk about developing successful communities and the implementation of the new department. Brian will deal with welfare reform, including implementing changes to the welfare system that may arise from the Welfare Reform Bill and the schemes agreed under the Stormont House Agreement. We will cover then any questions that you might have after that, if that's acceptable to the committee. Yeah. Okay. Top priorities for housing. It relates to the implementation of the social housing reform programme. Now, during 2015, the department proposes to bring forward reform proposals in a number of areas on both the policy and the structure of social housing in Northern Ireland. And there will be a number of important issues that we'll be bringing to the committee during the course of the year, and also to the executive. On the policy side, we have a proposal for a tenant participation strategy. The consultation process on that closed on the 8th of April. There were over 200 responses to it, and we're currently working on analysing those responses. A summary will be presented to the committee in June on that. On a regulatory framework, consultation commenced on the 12th of March this year. That's due to complete on the 10th of June, and a number of public consultation events have been organised in relation to that. And on a rent policy, we have been through a detailed pre-consultation exercise in relation to that, involving social housing tenants, housing associations and the housing executive and other key stakeholders. And a rent policy is being developed, and that will also be brought forward to the committee in the near future. A major aspect of the social housing reform programme will be structural issues in relation to how the delivery of social housing is organised in Northern Ireland, including some of the landlord services and regional services of the housing executive. And we'll be hopefully coming to the committee in the near future on a number of those issues. On child maintenance services, the process we're involved in here is moving child maintenance services onto a new scheme which was devised in 2012. We've been involved in a major reform programme designed to deliver a fit-for-purpose child maintenance system in Northern Ireland since about 2008. And the new legislation for the system has broadened the department's remit to include promoting financial responsibility that parents have for their own children, and encouraging to seek family-based arrangements and family-agreed arrangements rather than going through a statutory scheme in the department. The new system is called in the department the 2012 scheme. It's been supported by a new IT system, and the idea is that we help ensure parents and separated families receive the right support to work together in the best interest of their own children. And over the next number of years, there will be a major piece of work to be done to transfer people who have been taken forward onto the previous schemes devised in 1993 and 2003 and migrate them all onto the new system for 2012. At this point, the new system appears to be working a great deal more effectively and efficiently than the previous systems, with a very high level of client satisfaction, and it seems to be a very positive development. On people issues, I mentioned previously the very significant changes that are happening in the department, which are going to impact on all of our staff. And we're going through a very significant period of difficult and uncertain change. So in that context, the leadership of the department and our responsibilities towards our people become extremely important. Members will also be aware of the voluntary exit scheme, which will be taking place, and the potential for disruption within that. So we were aiming to enhance the leadership and management capabilities and our capacity to manage change as we move through the year and manage all those difficult issues. In relation to the reform of local government, the committee will be familiar with the legislation, which is currently in committee stage, and I'm due to discuss it again immediately after this session. The legislation is designed to transfer the current activities of the department in relation to urban regeneration and community development to local councils from April 2016. And the intention being that we will allow the new local authorities to take full responsibility for the kinds of activities that the department has been delivering at local level. I know the committee has a number of concerns and issues have been raised around the content, particularly of Clause 1, but also how the department will manage its relationship with the councils thereafter. And we've been working through those issues, and the Minister looks forward to seeing the report of the committee after the committee stage. Tracy will deal with the operational aspects of that transformation.
Thanks, Ian. Good morning. In terms of reform of local government, to ensure a smooth transition, we have a number of different work streams running, as well as legislation, looking at other aspects, like what's the retained function going to look at, what's the residual activities that need to be carried out, what are the HR issues, the finance issues, the business continuity issues. We are working very closely with the councils this year. Obviously, they had at one stage expected the powers to be transferred in March 2015. So as far as we can, we're attempting to align our budgets and our priorities with council's priorities. In terms of people, an HR strategy has been developed. Given that staff from DSD are not transferring with councils, we would intend to use the voluntary exit scheme, secondments and redeployment as a way to manage the residual staff. Councils have been asked to give us indications of any comments they want to make by the end of June. The budget for transfer in 2016 has now been agreed, and councils have been informed of that budget, and the Minister has undertaken to protect that budget from any further cuts. The Department has also put in place a community planning steering group to ensure that DSD is aligned and supportive of the new community planning powers the councils have. The second issue I wanted to talk about today was our commitments under TBUC. First of all, the commitments in terms of urban villages. The 5 urban villages have now been identified. OFDFM are responsible for the identification of the urban villages and the policy. DSD is leading in terms of the operational delivery of urban villages with support from the Strategic Investment Board. The 5 areas you'll be aware of: Collintown Centre, the lower end of the Newtonards Road, Ballysill and Ardoyne, Sandy Road, Donegal Pass and the Markets, and the Bogside Fountain in the northwest. We've been working very closely with a range of stakeholders to attempt to actually map what the fuzzy lines around those areas about where the focus should be. The objective of the initiative is to create and stabilise change within these communities. What we've attempted to do is learn from previous experience of delivering regeneration and take a fully integrated approach in terms of embedding good relations, community infrastructure and physical regeneration with a significant amount of community engagement. The governance arrangements are in place. There is a strategy board which is chaired by OFDFM. A programme board has been set up, and indeed there is a workshop with the programme board this afternoon, which is made up of senior government officials across other government departments, because delivery of this objective will require input and commitment from other government departments other than DSD. And SIB are in the process of recruiting a range of specialists who will support us in the delivery of this challenging but exciting initiative. I should say that the different urban villages are at very different stages. The Collintown Centre work has been on that for quite some time. The Lower Newtonards Road, we have started quite a process of engagement. Other areas we are in much earlier stages of engagement. The other TBUC initiative which we have responsibility for is shared neighbourhoods. DSD's objective is to create 10 new shared neighbourhoods and to carry out a review of housing to bring forward enhanced shared neighbourhoods. The Ravenhill Road is completed, and positively, the housing allocations indicate that indeed it is shared, and Apex is putting together a community commission plan to ensure that it remains shared. There are 3 others on site: Ravenhill Avenue, Feldon and Crossgar Road, which will be ready to allocate in 2015-16, and there's 5 more planned. We're also preparing a business case to purchase St Patrick's Barracks from OFDFM with a development plan which will maximise that site. Finally, from me, the creation of the new department. The committee will be aware of the complexity of this new department for communities and the very wide range of functions and other departments that will be involved in the new department. I have created a project board with representation from the other government departments. We have met and we have scoped out the work streams in order to deliver that. Real challenges are going to be staff engagement during that process, stakeholder engagement, resourcing the project, balancing competing priorities, not least maintaining business as usual as we deliver other reform programmes. That's really as much as I'd say on that at this stage.
Ryan's going to talk about welfare reform.
Okay, good morning. Members will be aware that welfare reform is actually about developing a system that protects the vulnerable. It's a system that is fair to those who use it and to fund it, and about empowering people to take personal and social responsibility and encouraging people into work and financial independence. The Welfare Reform Bill was introduced to the Assembly in 2012. And was subject to much discussion, culminating in it going to final consideration stage, or intended to go to final consideration stage on the 9th of March. But due to a petition of concern that was lodged, the bill was stopped before the final stage in terms of the legislative process, and that is subject to ongoing discussions with political parties. Welfare Reform Bill, in essence, is going to bring change to a number of the benefits. In particular, personal independence payment will be introduced to replace disability living allowance. There will be mandatory reconsiderations within the Social Security Agency. Changes brought about to the contribution element of employment and support allowance. The introduction of discretionary support to replace social fund. And in due course, the intention to introduce universal credit, although that's not likely to take place until during 2016-27, but there's some preparatory activity to undertake during the coming year, and also to have the introduction of a benefit cap. Because of the difficulties, I suppose, in getting this through the legislative process, there was discussions between the politicians culminating in the Stormont House Agreement. It started off in December of 2014. And an executive paper was then presented on the 22nd of January, and there was an agreement whereby the department, and particularly the agency, would bring forward a number of schemes which have been done. There are indeed 5 of those schemes, without going into too much of the detail on those, but they are designed to support claimants who would be financially worse off as a consequence of moving from DLA into PIP. There would be a social sector size criteria scheme, which in essence is the known as the bedroom tax, a scheme to protect that, a discretionary support scheme, which would, as I say earlier on, protect from social fund, and a supplementary payment scheme, which has a number of components, and that will be able to supplement the income of families both within and without children, preparing those who are looking or who are long-term sick and disabled people who previously qualified for additional support through the benefit system. In addition to that, the agency also has a range of targets around average actual clearance times and financial accuracy, which last year we performed strongly on, and we will continue to endeavour to achieve that, albeit against the backdrop that Ian has already alluded to of the financial challenge that we're going to have.
Okay, so that's our introductory section. Willing to take, happy to take any questions that any committee members might have.
Yeah, I have a few questions just before I bring in members. I suppose the first one is, in terms of the department's targets for 2015-2016, how have those targets been affected by the reduction in the budget? I think it's 9.7%. And do any of the targets depend on securing funding through monitoring rounds? And are there any milestones, even at this stage, that you may have difficulty in reaching? And what may they be?
Yes, some of the targets are lower than they were last year as a result of the budget reductions. So, in fact, just the first one, the number of social and affordable homes is set at 1,950. I think the target was higher than that last year, and that's a result of the sizable reduction in the capital budget available to the department. So the targets are a reflection of the financial position of the department as it sits at the minute.
Thank you. Just a couple of other questions. One of the commitments relates to reducing the gap between neighbourhood renewal areas and non-neighbourhood renewal areas and on a number of key indicators. And one of the milestones associated with this is by the 31st of March 2016 to have overseen the evaluation of the Delivering Social Change Nurture Signature project to determine future policy provision. And given the transfer of powers and functions in respect of social need to councils and the wide scope they'll have to address, what will be the relevance of future policy provision to councils?
Answer that. Obviously, neighbourhood renewal is a DSD policy, and as such, there'll be no obligations on the councils to continue with that policy. And what we're doing is we're transferring the powers and we're transferring the budget to councils, and each council will determine how it takes forward its approach. The nurture units are slightly different. The nurture units are funded through the Delivering Social Change, and they are delivered in partnership with us and Department of Education. And it'll be following the evaluation of the nurture units, which so far appear to be performing very well. Department of Education will determine whether or not it decides to mainstream those as part of the Department of Education's policies going forward. Obviously, that will be subject to the success, but also to budget availability, as nurture units are quite expensive to run.
And just finish off, you mentioned the urban village projects, and the milestone in relation to that is quite vague. It talks about, I think, the progress, the development of 5 urban villages. And how will you determine the success of that?
Indeed. Well, this afternoon, actually, I'm meeting with my project board, and we're looking at the range of outcomes and indicators which we'll use to measure the success of urban villages. You're absolutely right. This is a new initiative. It's very innovative. It hasn't been done before. There isn't a set of set indicators other than activity levels. So we will be agreeing those and bringing those back to the strategy board for agreement, but there'll be a range of indicators looking at differences in terms of economic, social, community cohesion and things like that.
Thank you.
Sure, just on that, what's the timeline attached to the urban villages? I know it is, for many people, very exciting, the development, but there has been some concerns raised. What is the feedback from the private sector within in that area? What resources is available to move the thing forward? And the timeline on it. I know that there are some, as you said, advanced than others.
I think that the urban villages will have different timeframes, but this will not be a short-term initiative. We need to recognise that if we want to actually achieve something here, it's not going to be done in 12 months or even 18 months or 2 years. The Colin Town Centre had been started in advance, so there is indeed outline planning permission about a new town centre in the lower part of the Newton Ards Road. There has been early engagement, and we've identified some projects which we can take forward, small projects over the next 12 months. In the other areas, for example, the Sandy Row area, the markets, there are some projects which the community already have on the hopper, which would like us to try to accelerate and get them forward. It's interesting that there also is alignment between some other initiatives, such as the Social Enterprise Innovation Hubs on the Sandy Row, which are actually going to be very supportive to the Urban Villages initiative. So my answer to you is that it is each village is going to be very different in terms of what the actual task is, how it's taken, and what timeframes. And I know that there is some frustration in some that not enough activity has taken place yet. We do need to actually recruit and get the team on board so we have the capacity to deal with all 5. And these are not these are quite big areas in some cases and will be quite complex with very different needs even within the villages. So yeah, work in progress.
And has there been a resource set aside to allow you to deal with it?
So the resources for urban villages is given to us through OFDFM. So this year we've secured 2.4 million revenue. So that's sufficient funds for us to actually put in place people. But of course there's always a delay in terms of getting people recruited, and we're in the process of that. and we're bidding in the monitoring round for capital funds to undertake some early projects. We don't have capital aside for urban villages at this stage of the game.
Again, just on that, because I know that the likes of the Callan area, that whilst there has been some work done it, it's in many ways it would have been seen as semi-rural, and that there wasn't a city centre. Is the vision all coming locally?
Yes.
I know that initially there are the urban villages in different places. Has the blueprint been lifted there and used as a vision?
Not at all. This is about actually co-design, working with the community to identify what their needs are within the community. And one of the key aspects is building sustainability into approach. One of the things we've learned from previous initiatives such as neighbourhood renewal is for some very positive initiatives. Some of those were not sustainable in the medium to long term, so we're trying to build the sustainability into our approach to these urban villages. So there definitely is not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, even if you look at the geography, Colin's got this sort of hollow, the bit in the middle of which needs to be filled in. The other ones are like Lowing Your Eyes is a linear route, whilst you've got Ballyslane and Ardoyne, very much quite densely populated. So they're very different from an infrastructure and a community perspective, and they each will need a different approach, which is driven by the community with our support and facilitation.
Sorry, I want to come back to some more points, but I didn't move on that. Just saying that I asked the question, but I want to come back to some more points on other aspects of the report later on.
And have you got the answer yet? No?
Yeah, I can't answer that.
You're looking back in again?
Different aspects, I think, that maybe people want to ask questions on that.
Okay, well, then, so go ahead and then Rob.
Pardon?
You want back in again?
Oh, no, didn't know anyone else wanted to ask questions on the urban villages aspect and then take other aspects of the report.
Roy, is that what you were looking back in?
No, it's a different
Okay, Rob, go ahead.
I know in terms of the social housing reform programme that there has been ongoing work and there have been different elements of consultations that have taken place. But from the very outset, what I've been concerned about is that we've always been told that it will be a political decision on the way forward in terms of housing structures and what policies that will be implemented. But I've been concerned for quite a while, and I've raised it at this committee, that once we've been told that this is will be a political decision, that the senior people within the housing executive are pushing ahead with quite a lot of the stuff that's contained within the social housing development programme. And what that does is to removing any decisions, because it's cart before the horse. And has there been any discussions between the department and the housing executive to say, hold on here, this is a political decision on the structures, the breakup and the way the housing executive operate? Because there doesn't seem to be, take homelessness, which was done at district office level, where people went, declared themselves homeless. They had a face behind that. They had people that they followed up with. That's been, well, part of it's been kept local, most of it's been moved regional. And people see that it would cause serious concerns. I thought all of that would have been part of the whole programme that the department was developing.
Well, the housing executive is going through a kind of a transformation process anyway, which is either connected to the social housing reform programme or not. I mean, it's essentially a process that they're trying to improve the quality of the services they provide to tenants and to more effectively deal with some of the issues that they're tackling. So some of the things which are happening in the housing executive, which may appear to be, I suppose, or being perceived to be part of the social housing reform programme, aren't actually part of that. No decision yet taken, because it has to be brought through the committee, obviously, and back to the executive in relation to the structures of the housing executive. So that has not been driven forward in any stretch of imagination. In fact, we haven't even completely finished the whole information gathering stage of it would actually inform any of those decisions. So the things which are being done in the housing executive are actually about improving the housing executive, whether it's in its current form or not.
See, I think that's a matter of opinion on whether it's improving or not. From the very outset of this, we had been informed that there would be an approach that would allow politicians to decide the structures of housing. I know you're saying that it might seem that way, but there's been a move on for quite a while to separate the landlord function from the regional function. That's part and parcel of what we're talking about, the department. So to say that it may seem, but it's not, there's quite a lot of stuff going on within the Housing Executive at the moment that many believe could destroy it forever ahead of any political decision. And I know that in the past people have said to me, but it's an arm's length body. But there's serious financial control from the department through to the Housing Executive. So we need to have a say in the structures and how it's works its way through.
Absolutely will do, and hopefully get that engagement started in the very near future, the next couple of weeks, on how that is taken forward.
Good, sir.
Roy?
Obviously, intense discussion on welfare reform bill, but one of the aspects that hasn't really been covered is the administrative burdens of not adopting the system. So I'd like you to clarify the cost of us maintaining the current system and current computer system, which will be redundant, a new system coming out elsewhere in the UK, or the alternative costs of trying to implement a paper administrative system, and how that would impact in your business plan.
Well, the current cost for administering the systems across all of the UK is just shy of £1 billion. And Northern Ireland's contribution to that each year is around £15 million. The intention with the introduction of welfare changes in GB is that they would see the closure of systems over a period of time. Some of those dates have yet to be finalised. For instance, in terms of the closure of tax credits and working tax credit, family tax credits and working tax credits. But I think as time goes by, the intention and in terms of the business case and how they would make some savings is that they would see those systems closed down. If it was that the systems were to be maintained and kept open, I have no doubt that the Northern Ireland proportion that we currently make to those systems will increase significantly. We haven't got into any firm discussions with the Department for Work and Pensions, who these systems are licensed to, of when that would be and how much it would cost, but I know that it is something which is in the public domain, that the £1 billion is how much the systems currently cost. What we haven't done is we haven't sort of tried to work out how much it would cost to administer social security in the absence of those systems by way of a clerical system. But I suppose one of my areas of responsibility in the agency is in operations. Currently, to administer the working aid side of operations alone takes around about 1,800 staff. That excludes pensions, also excludes disability and carers, and that's the fact that we have the systems available to us. So I would suggest that it would be nigh on impossible to actually administer the systems clerically, to administer the benefit system clerically. And we'd also have to take into consideration that the more clerical intervention that we have in the system, the more likelihood that there would be of error in the system, and that in itself would have an additional cost. But again, it's not something that we've tried to determine or calculate out.
So it'd be fair to say this business plan would be a nonsense if this is not adopted?
Well, I can only talk about from the welfare reform point of view, and there can be little doubt that if we didn't have, indeed, the legislation probably royal assent this side of the summer, a lot of the dates that we've put in there for the various elements of welfare reform would not be achieved within this financial year.
I'll move on to a couple of specifics. In your business plan, you've mentioned neighbourhood renewal. I haven't seen any mention of small pockets of deprivation. Are they still allowed for within the neighbourhood renewal funding programme?
Yeah, we're still funding them this year. And again, it would be subject to councils to determine whether they want to go ahead with those.
Okay.
Just as a general point, though, in relation to that, the business plan doesn't cover absolutely every aspect of the department's activities because it's a very wide and varied department. So relatively, comparatively smaller programmes such as smallpox deprivation might not make it in here, but they will be reflected in the business plans of the various business areas.
And then in terms of the new child maintenance programmes that has been introduced, I see there's a heading saying end liability in legacy cases. I think it's 2,800. It's quite a significant number. So is this case? What's that? Are they just being closed down and ignored? What's happened to those parents where the partner has built up sizable debts? Are they just being wiped?
Well, there are a number of things we're attempting to do. One is to migrate a number of very difficult cases which were being dealt with clerically because the old computer systems were simply incapable of managing them into the new scheme that's been in place from 2012. So a proportion of that 2,800 cases will be in that kind of category. At the minute they're administered in an office in England. But we hopefully get those all migrated, but that's going to take a period of time to 2018 before it's completed. There are also a number of cases where we'll have to accept there's probably limited or very low, none even likelihood of recovering some of the money from the absent parent. And in that case, there may be a need just to write off that debt, but those will all be done on an individual case-by-case basis as we work through it. And we will attempt to continue to pursue the individuals concerned.
Would you accept that many single parents who've been struggling and hoping for some sort of benefit from their other parent will be very disappointed with the thought that that's just been written off? I mean, is there nothing further that can be done to even change legislation to enable those parents who haven't taken responsibility for their children that they can make contributions towards it?
Well, the legislation does already require that, but we'll pursue every individual case to the extent that we can, but there will be some which we will be able to manage.
You've indicated the legislation enables it, but obviously it doesn't enable you to do your job. There must be limits in it. Is there suggestions for improving it to prevent such write-offs as are being suggested?
Well, I doubt if we could get legislation to prevent write-offs in the case where it's simply not possible to recover the debt. And there will be some cases that will be either unable to track down the individual parent concerned, or they just don't have the financial wherewithal, or have arranged their circumstances in such a way it's very difficult to recover legally. So we will obviously we'll be taking that back and looking at every possible avenue that we can, but this is a UK-wide scheme that is in operation here, and whatever would be applied wouldn't be done specifically in Northern Ireland. It would be a UK-wide application.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think it's true to say that, I don't know, what's called legacy case extend back quite a long period of time. And
Yeah, there's a number of which have gone back 20 years.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sammy Douglas.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Sam.
Sammy Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question for Tracy in terms of the urban villages and the timescale. And apologies if I get into a wee bit of technical stuff. I would be aware of a number of projects that the urban villages and the Bottom Newton Ards Road, that the urban villages would be the final piece of the jigsaw. Could you outline to me in terms of the timescale of a rough, I know it's fairly early stage, but some of these projects could go ahead if they got the additional money from urban villages. And again, does that mean, even though they've carried out an economic appraisal, does that mean they have to go down that route of, big black hole of another economic appraisal?
Honestly, I'd have to look at each economic appraisal individually. I mean, if obviously, if the economic appraisal is done and the approvals are in place, and the other issues is the planning issues, and then finally is the finances.
Yes.
So I'm happy to sit down with you. I would go through all of those, and we'll see, which ones you're most interested in there. But one of the big constraints on these is very often because of the way that you have to spend your money in a year, and because we're actually moving out of the regeneration game next year, is trying to get projects that can actually be completed with this financial year, and all the things that get in within that. But I'll make an appointment to come and have a chat.
That's another question, maybe it's for Brian. Brian talks to you about the commitment to maximise uptake of benefits by targeting those likely to be eligible for unclaimed benefits. And I suppose we all see people come into our offices and just encouraging us that even people who've been entitled to benefits maybe for years and didn't realise. So could you give us a rough idea of where things are at the moment in terms of benefit uptake? Is there still a huge number of people out there who are not claiming benefits they're rightly entitled to?
Well, since 2005, the department has invested around about nearly £8 million in benefit uptake activity, which has resulted in over £81 million additional benefit being paid.
And that's money that comes into Northern Ireland, is that right?
That comes in through the annual managed expenditure route, yeah. And I think it would be fair to say that we will always continue to have to encourage people to take up benefits because it is a very complex system.
Yes.
But one of the things that we have been doing over the last year and a half, 2 years, has been trying to target people on life-changing events that they've had. So for some that may be going into hospital, coming out of hospital, it may be going into a care facility. We've been doing some work with the Northern Ireland Prison Service and NIACRO with regard to prisoners and their families. And there's also been a project that had been ongoing through our Innovation Fund with people who were suffering from cancer or those who had brain injuries. So we're slowly but surely trying to build up our presence in terms of people knowing that we are there to try and help them. And you'll also be aware of the Make the Call campaign that has both been on television and through other media outlets, and the intention is to continue that. But I don't think that this is a nut that will ever be cracked in its entirety. I think that people's circumstances are continually changing, particularly older people. And we would continue, our anticipation is that we will continue to target those. So this year will be the final year of a 3-year plan for improving benefit uptake. We've been targeting each year 25,000 people, and indeed we've now surpassed that going through year 2. And I think there's actually a briefing to be given to the committee in June around improving benefit uptake. And we're going to now start developing a further 3-year plan and trying to learn from the innovation programme that we had. We also now have some enhanced data sets that we didn't have historically around matching up data across government and across some systems within GB, particularly around HMRC. So it's an area of work that I know our minister and previous ministers have been very committed to. We've got a fairly dedicated team, not only based within Belfast, but you'll be aware of our outreach service as well, and that's going to continue. And indeed, even with the funding challenges that we have in the department, that team is going to be maintained at the same level that it has been in previous years.
Yeah. And you also, just finally, Chair, you also talk about developing and testing new ways of collaborative working between government and the voluntary and community sector. And can you give us an assurance that that will continue? Because a number of these groups have obviously had their funding cut. Some have run out of money, say they got the big lottery as an example, and maybe give us some examples of how you're trying to support those groups.
Well, I think first of all, in terms of cross-government, we do have an improving benefit uptake government group which has all of the various departments, and I think probably 2 of the big successes over the last number of years has been the work that we've done with the Department of Agriculture around targeting rural poverty, and we had the AMARA, which is called AMARA, maximising incomes in rural areas. It's been very, very successful. And also some work that we've been doing with the Department of Education about ensuring that parents are aware of things like free school meals, free school uniforms, that type of thing, which is part of the support mechanism, and that will continue. In terms of what we've been doing with the voluntary sector, I think it would be fair to say that the improving benefit uptake work cannot be successful without the third sector. They're a core component of it. They're already funded by the department and also through councils quite extensively. And over the last number of years, Advice NI has actually been key to delivering one key element, which is the targeting of 25,000 people. Now that comes to an end, has come to an end in the last number of weeks. And our intention now is that we're going to go out for a further procurement to secure a partner, which is likely to come from the third sector again, to deliver that element. So as I say, the third sector get significant support from the department for generalist advice services, which is part of improving benefit uptake, and I don't envisage that changing in the near future.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Sammy Wilson. Can I just go back to one of the points that I raised? There are 2,800 legacy cases outstanding with the child maintenance, and I can think of some constituency cases where there are huge amounts. What's the total amount of money involved in that currently? Do we know? Can we get that?
Yeah. Okay.
And the second thing, just on the building together united communities, Tracy, you'd mentioned the areas where some of the areas where the shared houses were going to be built. How are you going to ensure that they're shared? I can think of the one at Feldon, for example, where already a number of constituents have received letters asking to express an interest, and I thought it was a mistake because it's regarded as, you know, a fairly nationalist area, and I thought, why am I invited to apply for a house there? If you don't get an uptake, do the houses lie empty, or do you allocate them so they don't become shared? And also, on an ongoing basis, how do you ensure that they stay shared?
I'm going to get Ian to go into the mechanics of it, because obviously you're absolutely right that we can't actually force. A shared neighbourhood. It has to be done on a voluntary basis. Ian, do you want to go through the mechanisms for that?
Okay, well, the initial allocations are to be done on a cross-community basis, but then each housing association has to produce a community cohesion plan, which will describe how they would intend to maintain that level of mix in the scheme as it goes forward. So obviously, as properties become void or vacant, then the housing association will have to fill them again, but it needs to maintain a way in which it can ensure that is done. Now, there are constraints because you're working off the common waiting list, and because they come from the top of the list have to be accommodated. But the housing association has to maintain a plan which will ensure that it finds some way of maintaining that community cohesion in the estate overall.
I think the thing is that we recognised the constraints with that when we started the first one, Ravenhill. The first one, and because it has to, you know, I think it's sort of like a charter that people have to sign up to, and you don't really know until further down the line to what extent it's going to be successful, is the truth. And this is, you know, we can't guarantee at this stage because we can't actually can't force the situation. So what we're doing is we're putting everything in place to attempt to actually achieve that and then maintain it through this community cohesion plan.
And one of the, sorry, just cut across you, but one of the issues is about the process by which people identify where they want to go and the number of common landlord areas to which they identify their names, and try to ensure that people are aware that this is a shared neighbourhood, which they might not otherwise have been willing to consider as being somewhere they might want to live, because it wouldn't normally be perceived as being one of their natural communities. But to make sure that that's an option that people are aware of is available whenever they're putting a name forward for common landlord areas.
Yeah, I can see how the Ravenhill one would have worked, given its locality. But you know, the choice of the areas is quite important. I can see how the Felon one might not work because of its locality. And you know, what I wonder is this just another name which you attach to, a housing development, but which in reality is not going to mean anything, because, as you say, you're working off a common waiting list. So, you know, if there's the top of the list is 100% people from a Protestant background, they're going to be allocated them first, or vice versa. And secondly, if the perception is this is an area where be fairly hostile, are you going to get people applying even if they are at the top of the waiting list? And how do you ensure then, when you've said that you'll be expecting housing associations to put in place a plan, but what kind of plan would you expect to be put in place to ensure that the mix continues if you happen to be lucky enough to get a proper mix at the start?
Well, the kind of actions you expect to see in the plan would be that to make sure that the estate doesn't have any kind of chill factors for one community or another. Now, some of that will be around displays of flags and emblems and that kind of thing, but also to make sure that people in the community who are living there are properly involved and participate in tenant groups and so forth, which will ensure that they feel that they've got a proper stake in that kind of community. So. We don't underestimate there are challenges here. It is a difficult thing to achieve. You're dealing with people's personal choices and you can't force somebody to move to an area they don't want to move to. What we hope to do is actually create opportunities and choices that some people may feel will take on.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stats that was, whenever there was some surveys done, there was quite a number of people said they would be interested in living in a shared neighbourhood, but it is not manifesting itself in the present circumstances. I suppose the allocations will be taking place this year, so we'll be back up next year. You'll find out to what extent we've been successful in achieving that.
We have to monitor it quite closely to make sure it is down.
Yeah, because I mean, the chill factor doesn't just exist within the state; it exists in the approaches to the locality, etc. You know, I mean, again, it sounds great, but when you start delving into the practicalities of it, I'm not so sure that this is any further forward. But anyway, the last question, just on the welfare reform and the additional protections have been put in for families with children with disabilities, children with long-term sick, etc., and also the discretionary element for future claimants. How, I take it a lot of that will be done manually, and what are the implications for the staffing within the Social Security Agency to facilitate those additional safeguards being put into the bill?
So the schemes as they're currently constructed, and I know they are subject to some finalisation, but we've been doing a lot of work over the last number of months in terms of how we would operationalise the schemes, right down to things that we would currently do through the systems that we have. So it will be done clerically. There will be some IT to give us support, especially around the accounting of it and how that will work. And there will have to be some recording mechanism to allow us to be able to account for all of the expenditure that we have. And hopefully, as members are aware, the overall funding envelope that we have for the schemes for at least over the next 5 years, 5-6 years, is about £594 million. How that's profiled has yet to be finalised, but a lot of the spend really doesn't take place until next year, the beginning of next year. We haven't got an exact number of how many staff that we will need to do this. So I haven't given some numbers, but I wouldn't like to sort of share that because I think it's very much a bit of a moving feast at the minute. But a lot of it will be clerical, there's no doubt about that. Supported where appropriate by cost-effective IT systems, because we could spend quite a lot of money and a lot of time trying to develop IT systems which may not necessarily meet the purpose for which we need them to do.
Be temporary anyway.
Sorry?
And they're likely to be temporary anyhow.
And well, they will no doubt be the lifetime of the schemes, whatever they may be.
Okay, and just one last one, I don't know, probably for you, Ian. What you see in the plan and in the budget which there is for the department over the next year, what savings were you assuming from the voluntary exit scheme?
I'm going to ask Deborah to answer that because she's got more of the detail.
Well, we had to make the 64 million of savings, but we also had to manage some internal pressures, which was around managing pay and price, and also the fact that there was the timing around the exit scheme. So we don't actually know what savings we're going to make as a result of the exit scheme. It's built into all of that, and there's some contingencies that we built into it. So at this stage, we are anticipating losing around 660 posts. And possibly losing 400 individuals through the exit scheme, the remainder obviously being managed through suppression of vacancies, etc. So at this time I can't actually tell you the savings that we will make as a result of the exit scheme, but there are planning assumptions within that.
Okay. But assuming an average cost of 30,000, that's £12 million you're hoping to save through the voluntary exit scheme.
Right, Chair. Dolores?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I refer to page 7 of your business plan, which is around the theme of housing? Could you give us an indication of the split between social and affordable homes of the 1,950 that are in your plan?
I think it's 1,600 are social and the rest are affordable.
Okay, and then can I then move on to the fuel poverty affordable warmth scheme and some of the targets contained within that. It's my understanding and experience, Chair, at local level there are some difficulties in getting this initiative off the ground and significant time delays between the interaction between the local councils and the housing executive. So how is that being monitored, and when might we hear of your appraisal of the success or otherwise of the scheme?
So I think the difficulties you're referring to are the affordable warmth scheme.
That's correct.
Well, that's I don't know if you call it a revised version or an amended version of the previous warm home scheme. Yes, we're aware that there have been some issues in the flow of activity between the housing executive and the local councils involved there. Although the housing executive are assuring us now that a lot of those issues have been overcome. We have quarterly meetings with the housing executive in which they update us on the progress of the scheme and how they're getting on in relation to it. And we'll keep on top of that to see how effectively it works. Just to advise the committee that this scheme is actually different from the warm home scheme. It's much more targeted initially. rather than the Warm Home Scheme, which is pretty much demand-driven, and people came to us seeking the support. Because it's a more targeted scheme and you're aiming at the more vulnerable members of society and the more vulnerable households, that inevitably means it's a more resource-intensive, more drawn-out kind of a process. But I think it does more effectively target the actual need that exists in the community.
Well, it's not targeting any chair if it's not delivering anything for anybody, and I don't accept that they've had long enough to think about it and to plan for it. And I would have to express my frustration on behalf of my constituents who have been waiting a long time, have had their initial assessments done, and it's in the system. And I think, Chair, that's something that we as a committee should scrutinise and hear more on from the department. And furthermore, Chair, there's a further a point that I hadn't been aware of, in that disabled living allowance is taken account of in relation to the £20,000 income. So we have the bizarre situation of a house where maybe there's more than one person disabled and they're being ruled out, and yet having good heating is crucial to their well-being and actually plays a real role in terms of their health condition. So I would ask that the department come back and look and tell us how many people have been caught in that, and whether or not there is any way around it, or any way in which that an amendment to the current regulations or guidance could be produced by the Minister or through his department officials. But I want you to come back about that.
Okay.
Do you have any response now, Ian? Or?
Well, we accept that there has been a delay in getting the scheme off the ground. The previous scheme was stopped and the new one was introduced, and so there will be some frustrations at the start. I'm happy to come back and provide the committee with more information on the number of applications received, the number that have been approved, and how long it's taken to do individual cases, and whether there may be any particular problems in particular locations, and we can give a committee a fuller briefing on how the scheme operates and how the criteria have been established.
Well, Chair, whenever we get the briefing, I wanted to know not just how many have been approved, but actually many have been delivered and the work has been completed, so I'd like that to be included. And I also am aware of hold-ups in disabled persons facility grants. It's the usual old story, battering about between one department and health and all the rest of it. In the meantime, it's a false economy, because additional domiciliary services have to go into the home because they don't have the proper adaptations done to their home. So if we could have that included in terms of that oversight of the delivery of some of these services by the Housing Executive, I think that would be very helpful. And Chair, could I ask, in relation to, you had mentioned St Patrick's Barracks, but you didn't mention Girdwood, and could you give us an update on the situation in relation to Girdwood?
Well, in Girdwood, we're on target with Girdwood in terms of what where we'll complete the. We're in target to complete the infrastructure works by March 2016. So I don't think there's any specific issues in Girdwood. Obviously, keeping the community engagement going there is going to be very important, and there's a lot of buy-in to what we're trying to achieve. So,
will the houses be built anytime soon?
The houses are sort of further down the line than this year, so I don't have a target for houses in this year.
Well, Chair, I have to say that's very disappointing, given the increasing need on waiting lists for housing in the North Belfast area, and would ask the department to have a look again at their target setting for reaching that particular objective, which I would have thought is the main concern of many of the community representatives and residents association in that particular area. And perhaps we could have further detail on that. It would be very useful. And finally, Chair, my last point is in relation to the urban villages. I just would like to know, how are those plans actually addressing sectarianism and the lack of sharing and neutral facilities? I mean, is it just about doing up areas, or is it actually a bit more meaningful in terms of what TPOC was supposed to be about, and that's about not only building success but united communities?
No, you're absolutely right. The whole point of the programme is to have the interrelated objectives of good relations, community cohesion and physical regeneration, which obviously some of the urban villages are single identity but have interfaces. It's about sort of building up social capital in the areas and ensuring that there's more confidence in terms of the community, the cross-community engagement. So it is very much taken into account as part of the taking forward this initiative.
Chair, I'd be interested to see in some of the business case in relation to those proposals, because I think there is also a view that for some, shared means equal but separate, and I didn't think that was what we would want to see in terms of actually building a better society. So perhaps we could have some indication of some of the key targets and the timescale for delivery of those, and how, in fact, we are going to address the sectarianism that is between our communities, and particularly evident at interfaces. I think that would be useful for us to have oversight of.
Okay, happy enough with that, Tracy?
Yes, I can bring back the outcome framework for the urban villages and how that addresses good relations.
There's a fair bit there on that. Got a question from Doris. Okay, Mickey?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. This is for Brian. A few questions. Brian, in the 2015-16 milestones, it says, and obviously this is predicated on the success or otherwise of the bill going through, by 31st of January 2016 to obtain ministerial agreement of a launch strategy in advance of the introduction of universal credit. You are aware, and you've talked about the IT systems, but it isn't working in Britain in the sense that they're supposed to have 5 million at least rolled out when it started in February. That hasn't happened. Has that been taken in? Will that be taken into account? Because universal credit is the plank, the main plank of the whole change. It's fairly clear when you try and put 6 benefits into one, it becomes increasingly difficult. And I think of the example of pension credit here when it was centralised in Derry. It took about 4 years to get it right. Probably still hasn't got it right to some degree. So obviously all of that, because there's huge amounts of money already have been written off in the IT systems in Britain because they can't get it right. It's mostly people who live at home, single people who live at home with their parents who are already on that system. And obviously for families it becomes just hugely almost impossible. So I'm just wondering, obviously that would have to have some bearing on how it may or may not be introduced here. And the other question I had was, it talked about the introduction of personal independence payments, and it says here by the 31st of March 2016 have introduced PIP for new claims. And natural reassessment, what does that mean, natural reassessment?
So I'll take the first one in terms of universal credit. Currently in GB, where they are is that they're running 2 IT systems. They have what's called Live Service, which in essence is a test and development system, and Digital Service, which is what's going to be the end state system that everybody will be maintained, with the intention that 7 million people will be administered through that UC system. This year, the intention is that there will be 400,000 people by the end of this calendar year. There will be 400,000 people on the Live Service system, mainly those who would have historically received job seekers allowance who are single without housing costs and families, so a relatively straightforward claimant group. And that will be administered throughout over 700 Job Centre Plus offices in GB. The Digital Service then is due to go live in May 16, and it will then be rolled out with the intention that anybody who is making a fresh claim to universal credit or any of the historical benefits, the 6 benefits that you allude to, they will all be on the system in December 17. And then you will have what's called migration, which are those who didn't naturally come across on the UC, and that's to be completed by the end of December 2019. From a Northern Ireland point of view, the earliest that we would take the system is Digital Service, so we can't actually take it until May 2016 at the earliest, and that's with agreement with the DWP. The particular target that we have is really for the Minister to approve how we go about rolling it out in Northern Ireland in anticipation that we would get it in May 2016. So we have to stand up some service centres which would provide telephony support. We've announced 3 locations for those, being Derry, Newry and here in Belfast. And then also how we would roll it out into our network of jobs and benefits offices and social security offices, of which there are 35. And again, we have to plan for that in terms of we have to select staff, we have to train staff, we have to consolidate them in that training, and then we have to bring customer groups on. So really that target is more about how we're going to do that, and that will be rolled out during 2016. The anticipation is that it would start to roll out sometime during 2016. As far as PIP goes, natural reassessment is when you have a change in your own circumstances and you naturally migrate across onto the new benefit and you would go through the new assessment process. Managed reassessment which is actually a wee bit like managed migration for universal credit, is where you didn't have a significant change and you continue to receive DLA. We would then put in place a process whereby we will call people in a particular order, and they will then go through the new assessment process for PIP. So natural is, it just happens to people, it could be a significant change of circumstances, and they will come across and have to apply for PIP.
You see, just in finishing, there are two systems running at the moment. The
For
old
universal
system
credit?
and the
Yes.
pilot scheme for the new. What if the new digital system simply doesn't work?
Well, the digital cert system is actually currently in operation. It's in,
But it's dealing with very limited people, because what you're saying is it's dealing with single people who have no complications really. They just get one payment of benefit. Now, if you then introduce families with housing costs, and in universal credit the taper's going in one end and benefit coming out the other end with employment, allegedly, then that complicates the whole thing. So it's all predicated again on whether this digital system can work. Now, the projections are that it could take 8 to 10 years to get a system which actually can cope with this. So just, that's going to...
Well, in terms of the live service, the experience of DWP has been that whilst they started off taking people who were job seekers on job seekers allowance, single, no housing costs and no families, the dynamic of that group has actually started to change, because you do get some of those individuals who have a partner who then become parents, who may well then have an illness, and they do not go off UC, they continue to be maintained on UC, and that allows DWP to test how the system and how robust the system has been able to deal with those. But the digital service is actually now live. It's live in Sutton, in London. Yes, you're absolutely right. It has a very small number of claimants, around about 200. But I would have to say the majority of those, believe it or not, are those people who have probably the most complex needs, those people with an illness or a disability. For no particular reason, it just happens to be in the postcodes that it's serving. That's the dynamic of that particular customer group. And I would agree, it is of course a big challenge for DWP to get a system which is scalable and robust. They have very firm plans, and they haven't changed, to my knowledge anyway, in terms of how they're going to do it. But assuming that universal credit were to come into Northern Ireland, I hope the committee would take some comfort from the fact that all of the pain that is done for the IT development is actually being in DWP rather than Northern Ireland. What we get, and the only time that we actually have to take UC, is when they have a digital service which is scalable and robust. Until that is done, Northern Ireland won't be introducing UC because we don't take the live service.
But we could be waiting a long time, is that what you're saying?
Well, assuming that it's May 2016, which is the date they're working to, we've already had discussions with DWP whereby we would actually like to take the system at that time. The intention would be that we would trial it in an office in Northern Ireland. We would also implement the 37 IT changes that we've specifically asked for, example being the 3 payment flexibilities, which will be different to the main system. That will take about 6 months to do. So that could probably see us through towards the end of 2016. And then the transition and migration plan that we have to bring to the Minister by the end of this year would set out how we would roll it out beyond that.
So what you're saying is the variations that may or may not be introduced here can actually be bolted on to the new system?
The IT team in DWP have told us there won't be an issue. Indeed, actually...
Because we were told going back not that long ago there's going to be huge problems with that it couldn't happen, and you know...
Well, I would have to say the 37 IT changes vary in severity. Some we currently have in the current systems, by way of example, bank holidays have to have those featured in the current system. The big IT changes are going to be things around the payment flexibilities. But I would have to say the payment flexibilities are currently built into the system. Anybody can go along and ask for a split payment. They can have a payment that is made to them twice a month rather than once a month, and they can have a payment made to a landlord. But they're the exception. The challenge for the IT guys is to make that the default situation here in Northern Ireland. They haven't said to us that it's not doable. It is doable. It does come at a cost, which they haven't actually sent to us yet. But there's nothing to suggest that the changes can't be made.
That's right, thank you.
Okay, Gregory.
Yeah, you've outlined there what you've called a number of key deliverables over the next 12 months. Is that up to this time next year, or is that to the end of the current financial year, i.e. the end of March?
End of March 2016.
It's not really 12 months then. Okay.
Oh, well, 12 months from the time it was written, I suppose, but
All right,
not
okay,
now. Yeah.
right, but it's this full
Financial year.
financial year, okay. And see down towards the end then, you talked about completing the launch phase of the new state pension. What does that actually mean? What's the end of the launch phase? What, is that 31st of March, or?
It's about universal credit, your friend?
No, you've said down there at the bottom, to have completed the launch phase of the new state pension.
So state pension, in terms of legislation, has sort of completed its journey through the Assembly, and there are a number of things that we have to do to get ourselves ready for the launch stage of it, because it doesn't actually come into effect until during 2016. So this is really about the preparation activity that we would have to undertake. By way of example, we have 300,000 pensioners in Northern Ireland. There's a huge communications programme that is going to have to be undertaken, and indeed actually that's going to start very shortly. And it's to get both our customer base and also us within the agency prepared to be able to implement it from a particular date, because it happens to everybody at the same time. It's not as if this is going to be phased over a period of time. So this is about getting the changes to pensions in at the same time.
That's why I'd mentioned the time frame, Chairman. If we are talking then about the end of March, there still seems to me anyway a degree of confusion existing, particularly amongst existing pensioners who are not clear, despite it having been, it's been stated a few times in this committee and elsewhere, but there does appear to be a communication issue in terms of who qualifies for the new state pension, when they qualify, and the non-applicability to existing senior citizens. I'm just wondering, are those things going to be incorporated in the communications between now and the end of March?
They will, and I think it's a valid point in terms of there's a lot of the unknowns at the minute around the changes that will be brought about by pension reform. But we do have until next year to start to get the necessary ducks lined up. And as I say, the communications programme will actually probably start within the next 4 to 6 weeks. At a high level, and then it will get down into individual level. Because one of the changes to pension reform is the change in the pension age. It comes in at different times for different individuals based on their age, the number of contributions they've made over many years. So it's not as if everybody will change at once. It's going to be over a period of time that we'll see those changes. Around about 5 years, we think that we'll see the changes actually be implemented. But the communications is going to be hugely important for the committee, for our customers, for our partners in the third sector, and that's something that we're going to kick off very shortly.
It's just, you said the communications are probably going to kick off in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously that's coming quite near the summer holiday period.
Yep.
Do we take it that that'll continue between now and the end of March?
It's going to be on a continuum, and I would actually suggest it's going to continue beyond March next year. I think what we want to really make sure we don't do is find that we get inundated with a lot of inquiries that we are unable to answer, because everybody's circumstances are different. So it's going to be the way in which we've developed our communications is fairly high level. We'll bring it down. Then we're going to have some telephony teams in place who will be able to take telephone calls and trying to explain the implications on a case-by-case basis. But it won't end in March next year. I think it'll work its way through, because you will have new people coming on continuously who will be impacted by the changes.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Paula?
Thank you, Chair. If we look back, I think it's page 6 of your report of what happened in 2014-15 business plan. You talk about the 17,000 householders that you assisted, or that DSD assisted, to live independently as possible. Another 17,000 this year again is put in. Under what umbrella is that? Is that under supporting people, or is that under something else?
Yeah, it's supporting people.
Okay, but it's specifically 17,000 householders.
17,000 people.
Okay.
Individuals.
Individuals. And is that individuals, in what terms? Give me a few examples under supporting people, how that is assisting these 17,000 householders or individuals.
Okay, it broadly falls into 2 substantial bits. There's a floating support, which we have in a number of areas now. That's not universally at the level we might like to see in all occasions, but that would be the bulk of the people who are supported through supporting people is done through that. And then there are also the supported living schemes. principally for or disabled people.
Okay. And the floating support, which I am a great supporter of, having used that in a previous career, that definitely works. That is a fantastic system. Is that across all of the trusts, or is that?
Well, as I said, where it works effectively, it works very well, as you said, but it doesn't get equal application in all areas. So we're actually engaged in a review of supporting people at the minute, trying to look at those areas where it's most effective and efficient, and then those areas where it's perhaps working less effectively, and see whether we can do something in terms of how the scheme is administered or operated or targeted to address those issues where it needs to be improved. So we're still in the process of gathering the data on that, but we will of course be coming back to committee with more detail on that as we get through that process, and there will be a consultation on it later in the year.
Yeah, I look forward to that, because I don't imagine there's anywhere within Northern Ireland that wouldn't want to partake in that whole scheme, because it is such a worthwhile scheme and so beneficial to our health service. So, yeah, really good. Look forward to hearing back on that. Fred touched on earlier to do with homelessness. We have had numerous witness sessions in here to do with homelessness and the increase and the problem. And I mean, we only need to go around Belfast in the evening. Some of us were at an event last night, and we seen from where we even were the amount of homelessness on our streets, which is one issue. We have the other issue of families that are becoming homeless, and then we have another issue where we have people who are leaving domestic violence situations. I know we have some refuges there for women, but we don't seem to have any for men who want to take care of their children if they're leaving a domestic violence scenario. Under the homelessness, how far along the road are we with that? When are we going to actually see some sort of results in tackling this? Because I don't seem to have seen any up to now, even though we've discussed this in this committee many, many times. It just seems to be increasing. So in part of your plan, what is the plan for that? I'm embarrassed to say I'm quite new in this job, so I don't know that yet. Okay.
I'll have to come back to committee on that.
I think that's important we get another briefing on that, because that is
I
problem.
would just say that on the 25th of June we're having a briefing on
Okay.
supporting people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it is
That's
part of the
scheduled,
supporting people, and it is part of the plan to tackle homelessness within that. And it's just becoming a greater and greater issue. I know within the city that I live in, and I'm sure amongst many of our cities around Northern Ireland, this is increasing. But when we often look at it, we look at people who are living on the streets, or looking at single men. But there's a bigger problem than that that is growing within Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, sure, I mean, obviously, quite clearly,
Yeah.
we will
Well,
be
that's
returning to that. There's no other member indicating to come in, so
Excuse me, Chair,
Tracy, go ahead.
can I just come back on my answer on Goodwood, because Ian just pointed out to me that indeed Apex Housing is actually on site at the moment. So there will be construction there in 2016. It isn't a target that's in my targets, but that's probably a better answer for you than the one that I gave you. Thank you.
Chairman, I think it would be remiss, because Paul made reference to it, but, you know, we bring the department along here and we talk about the business plan, whether we believe it's deliverable and the flaws in it and the difficulties, but we do have quite an impressive list of delivery in 2014-15, and I think, you know, it's one of the things which we as a committee should emphasise, that where there is stuff delivered, that there should be recognition given to it, because the media and the people who want to criticise this place and the delivery of this place will very often target the things we don't get done, but there are a lot of things that have been done, and I think, you know, the department should be commended that has been delivered.
well, I think presumably everybody would agree with that sentiment. I mean, clearly there's still an awful lot of things which need to be done, but there are still very good things being done. And I think that is always undersold, but that's probably part of our own responsibility as politicians, who don't reflect that probably well enough. So
That's right.
But I mean, I could just probably follow on the point, Sammy, and to commend the department for all the very good work that has been done. Thank you for being here this morning to outline your business plan for the time ahead and taking on board the queries and concerns raised by members. Quite clearly, while there is a lot of good work done, we still have to identify the gaps and work with yourselves to robustly to close those, I suppose. So I look forward to continuing engagement with yourselves. I know there's going to be some responses coming back from yourselves in relation to queries raised earlier, and we do have a number of briefings already scheduled, and we'll follow them all up collectively. So I thank yourselves this morning for your attendance here this morning to help the committee in our work. Thank you very, very much. Okay, members, moving on. Moving back. All members, then the next item, which is the regeneration bill. That's moving on the clause by clause. Okay. We have a late submission from the North West Community Network, and that's at page 8 of your table papers, and this is relating to the regeneration bill, and I'm advised that most of the concerns have been raised by other organisations. So members content that we would include that submission in the appendices of the committee's report. Agree with that, thank you. Again, then, at our last meeting on the 19th, we agreed to provide that any proposed amendments would be provided to the clerk by 5 p.m. yesterday in order that the committee would be able to consider them and in order to allow us to complete our clause-by-clause consideration of the bill today. There's a copy of the bill that obviously in your papers in front of you this morning, and there's a summary table of proposed amendments in tabled items, so there's a copy of all of the proposed amendments in your tabled items. I think there are 5 in total. Again, just to say that the department officials are here this morning in the gallery and would be very supportive of assisting the committee in any way they can if we feel they need to. So what I want to do obviously then is that beginning with clause 1, to put the question to the committee whether it's content with each clause and schedule as drafted by the department. And just to remind people then that the committee would be finished, if you like, the clause by clause will finish when we deal with the clause on the long title that's drafted. Okay. Again, just to reflect that, remind ourselves that we may have concerns or observations around particular clauses, but there doesn't need to be necessarily an amendment. But members can still, for purposes of producing our final report, still can put those concerns on the table or recommendations or queries that we want to put to the department or the minister to be dealt with at a later stage. And we've done that around monitoring, for example, and that was adopted by the minister himself. So again, that's just after we go through the clause by clause. If people, or while we're going through the clause by clause, if people have an issue but don't necessarily want to put an amendment, you can put down a recommendation or an observation for inclusion in a report. Okay, so just to say then that the amendments that we have in front of us are in 2 categories. The first one relates to economic regeneration versus social need, and the second is in relation to restrictions on a council assisting project associated with someone who has a criminal conviction. That's a la the SPAD bill. So what I wanted to do today was to deal with the clauses, or rather the amendments relating to the economic regeneration stroke social need first. Members happy enough with that? Yeah. Then there are 4 such proposed amendments on economic regeneration, and they're actually mutually exclusive. We're been advised by the Bill's Office clerks. So if any of the amendments are made, if you go through the 4, then the others will not be considered. Just want to also say that we need to note that there may well be some consequential amendments flowing from these recently submitted amendments. And should the committee agree on an amendment, and this is subsequently supported, the consideration stage, then the department itself would then bring forward any consequential amendments at further consideration stage. So just to advise members of that. I wanted to take the amendments in the following order. Members content. I mean, if we just move straight into the business of this. So in terms of clause 1, the first amendment would be that a council may provide financial assistance to any person for doing or intending to do anything which the council considers will promote economic and or social regeneration in an area in its district. That goes on, and then part 2 of that. That amendment was proposed by Sammy Wilson and Jim Allister. And I'm just first of all asking Sammy, are you content to move this?
I better move it, yeah.
Okay, so just so as the people understand then, this would delete the requirement on the council, or remove the requirement on the councils to address social needs, and replace that with this provision around social regeneration or economic or social regeneration activities. Again, this amendment then would remove the 2F as well, which was in the previous amendment, which was addressing social need. So really, I suppose, moving on, if members are content. Thank you.
Chair, if social need, who would then be responsible for addressing social need? Would that remain with the department?
Well, the department, unless Ian or his colleagues want to contradict what I'm saying, but I think Ian made the point that, on behalf of the Minister, that if social need was taken out of the requirement of the bill, then the Minister would not transfer the powers to local government. It would have to retain the power within the department. I think that's what I understood. Ian, if you want to add a comment forward then.
The point I made at the meeting, I think it was last Thursday, was that if the power which we currently have under the social needs order does not transfer, or an equivalent provision which would allow you to do the same thing does not transfer, then we are unable to transfer the full range of the things which DSD currently delivers. So, for example, if there's no reference to social need or an equivalent kind of provision in the bill, then programmes such as the Community Investment Fund, for example, could not be transferred to, or the kinds of activities which are supported under the Community Investment Fund could not be transferred to local government.
Ian, many of those would fall under the category of social regeneration, surely, because as was talked about on previous occasions, the social regeneration aspect is fairly widely defined anyhow, and so many of those things would then be covered. So it's not a case of it's either or. We had a long talk about this, and I don't want to go through the debates we've had previously, but the economic regeneration was fairly clear as what we meant by that. There were aspects of it. Dolores raised a couple of issues the other day. What about where you were going to talk about childcare facilities, or what about where you were talking about doing facilities based within a community type environment? Now, some people would argue that meets a social need in an area, but it also meets an economic need, because it frees people up to get out to work, and it makes people more available for work. So it crosses over the two. So it's not really right to say that a lot of what would be done under the Community Investment Fund, for example, could not be carried out to the council, is it?
Well, I'm thinking in particular things which we do fund, like community networks, for example, or women's organisations which have no obvious economic regeneration impact. The Minister's compromise amendment was intended to allow the full range of the department's activities to come across. So the reference to social regeneration would, in our view, be an equivalent provision to the reference to social needs.
And
that's why it was proposed.
And we are saying and/or social regeneration activities. And again, when you mentioned the women's network groups and whatnot, you could argue there that, first of all, there's a connection between the economic regeneration and social regeneration, but we're now including that the councils may provide funding for the promotion, development, or regeneration of commercial, industrial, or other economic or social regeneration activities. So, I think it's covered there. It also avoids the catch-all phrase that there was at the end, which was the one which we were concerned was open to abuse.
I think the wording of it, it doesn't actually read right, the suggested amendment, because we're talking about at the very start, the clause provides, the general power provides to promote economic and or social regeneration, so it's already covered there. We go on then to repeat that in subsection 2A, and we're talking about promotion, development or regeneration of if you skip the rest of social regeneration activities, it doesn't, right. If we take it to social regeneration.
The reason it's worse than, Henry, than what the original wording was, because you had council considers anything which the council considers will promote economic regeneration. That was in an area of its district. Then 2A was the promotion, development or regeneration of commercial, industrial or other economic activities. We've just added in social activities here.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually read right in legal terms. That's our advice. It would probably be better if you wanted to do that, to separate A and B and have A, as it originally was, the promotion, development or regeneration of commercial, industrial or other economic activity, and secondly, the promotion of social regeneration activity. So that would be the same thing, but
That's the same thing, yeah.
different, in a better way.
Yeah.
But I think there is a point here in terms of the department has a particular focus on tackling social need, tackling areas of deprivation, which was done under the social need provisions. That's the issue there. Whether that can be continued to be done under this heading, it probably can. It probably can still come in under the heading of social regeneration activity.
Really?
Yeah, just maybe ask Henry. When this bill was drafted, it states very clearly powers in relation to social need, powers of council to address social need. It doesn't talk about social regeneration, although that's an integral part of it, I presume. But it deals specifically with social need. That's presumably when the department was drafting this bill, that was at the centre of the bill. So how can you remove the central plank, if you like, of the bill and change all that and just ignore social need? Social regeneration and social need are two different issues. They can be complementary, but they're also different.
Well, social need can come under the umbrella of social regeneration.
Yeah, I accept that. But they're two different issues in that sense.
But in terms of putting a piece of legislation through, it's to allow the powers to go over the council, to allow them to do the types of things that the department has been doing in the past. One of those was tackling areas of deprivation, and that was done through the Neighbourhood Renewal Programme, and it was done under the social need powers. That type of work could continue with the powers in this bill described in a different way. That's our view.
Excellent, Douglas.
It's just a different emphasis.
Thank you, Chair. Guy Clarinetis, first of all, I'm a board member of East Belfast Community Development Agency, and I've been involved in that organisation for over 25 years. Ask you, Henry, in relation to where we're at the moment, how would these changes impact on an organisation like that supports dozens and dozens of community and voluntary groups right across East Belfast?
In terms of the programmes that we do at the minute, in April 2016, the powers to do that type of work will transfer over the councils. Councils will then determine how they operate their schemes or projects, whatever they want to take forward. They will be in a position to determine what to be there in the area, and they will then decide what groups to support, what programmes to support, what their priorities are. That's my
and I'm obviously a recent addition to this committee, but I've been following some of the stuff and I've spoken to some community and voluntary organisations. What's the Minister's view on this?
The Minister's view is that he wants to ensure that the full range of activities which the Executive wanted to transfer can be successfully transferred to local government, and that the provisions in the bill will ensure that they are able to do those. So he believes that his suggested amendment would allow that to take place.
The difficulty with, I mean, we've had this out on the table on numerous occasions. Difficulty with the social need provision in this was that it was abused, and it was open to abuse. So, for example, in some areas, organisations which were clearly set up to support paramilitary groups, ex-paramilitary groups, etc., were funded because people say there's a social need to do this. The department was happy that social need included all of those kinds of activities. Now, for many people, they saw that as an abuse of the power. And the reason why we wanted it to be limited to social regeneration was to prevent that kind of abuse. And I mean, to a certain extent, the way in which the law was applied in the past brought about this situation, Ian. To me, this is a reasonable tightening up of the powers that will be available to councils and will avoid some of the abuse and the misuse of public funds which cause so much public anger. And, you know, it doesn't... and I think, Henry, you're saying that many of the regeneration aspects, whether it's the softer social aspects of it or the harder economic aspects of it, will still be possibly continued with this amendment. Well, at the same time, it clears up some of the concerns people had about the way in which it was abused. And you know, Jim Allister gave a list of examples of how it had been abused in the past.
Sorry, I'm not aware that through the chair, Jim Allister did give a list of specific examples. You have trotted out over this past number of weeks about all these abuses. You haven't given any specific examples. I've sat in the committee, I haven't heard him giving any specific examples. He's given kind of very general
he has
in his opinion.
Just a record, he has
but
given
in his opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a subjective view of what so-called abuse of this system is. It's not an objective viewpoint by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, right.
Declaring interest as a committee member of Horizon Sure Start, which operates in an area of need, an area of deprivation. What I'm trying to get this clearer understanding is why is there objection as long as there's a method of enabling social regeneration? Why does that definition not satisfy yourselves? Because you will not socially regenerate an area which is not in need. You will socially regenerate an area which is in need. So what is wrong with that definition? What explanation have you that you do not think it is wide enough?
The Minister put forward an amendment which includes the wording of social regeneration.
But it also then includes this word social need, which allows it to go much, much wider than simply addressing the collective needs of the community and in terms of enabling social regeneration.
Actually, in response to Mr. Wilson, or sorry, Mr. Douglas, the Minister's he wants to be certain that the provisions in the bill will allow the full range of the things which the department currently does and which were covered by the executive decision to be transferred, and wishes to ensure that there's no uncertainty or ambiguity about that. However, he'll take the committee's report on board and consider it in detail after it's come through, and if alternative amendments are proposed, he will give them the proper consideration and think on it carefully.
I just think it's important that the community works cohesively together as a united community to regenerate and not have multiple funding in certain areas.
Okay, well, I mean, we're dealing with this particular amendment, so presumably, Fran, do you want to make a point, or sorry, you look?
Sure, it's just a thing. And again, it goes back to what Maggie said, the whole face of the bill. It mentions the thrust of having social need. And I think one of the arguments and debates that there has been for a while there was a concern that councils, unless you had something like that, and then councils could ignore dealing with social need. Now, if you go by what Sammy is saying, if there are people who are abusing the system, then it needs to be dealt with. But the department could have dealt with it, and councils would deal with it. You know, if there's one bad apple on the barrel, what you don't do is bring something to deal with one bad apple and then affect the other 99%. There are thousands of groups out there that do good work and do good work day and daily and trying to deal with social need. So it's part and parcel of the bill, has been from the start. And Sammy and Jim Allister's come in and just to try to remove it out of the bill.
Okay, I mean, certainly from my own point of view, the bill is about transferring powers to enable councils to address social need, and the Minister has made that very clear. That's what he wants to do. He wants to deliver. We're dealing with an amendment here which deals with deleting the requirement to address social need and replace that with this generic, non-defined description of social regeneration. There's no basis or substance in law as opposed to what social need does have. So on that basis, I certainly have my vote. But anyway, there's no consensus around the table, so we'll just put this particular amendment to the meeting, which is the amendment, the first amendment, which is tabled by Tommy Wilson and originally by Jim Allister. So,
Chair, can I just check?
Okay,
can I just
sure.
check on the basis of the comment that was made that Sammy is the proposers willing to accept that?
Separating the two out, yeah.
Yeah, the separating the two out.
That's a different amendment. You know, that's a different amendment, so you need to. I mean, we're moving on the amendment here, which is tabled, which we're putting in the meeting.
Tidy it up later. I think that what we're saying is grammatically it doesn't make sense, but that can be tidied up. But you know.
We're putting and voting on the amendment. We'll have to know what we're voting on. But it's back now, you know.
Okay, let's keep it this way, and if it has to be tidied up grammatically, it can be tidied up at consideration stage. Okay.
Right. So the amendment as tabled, which has been moved by Sammy. Okay, so I want to put those in favour of the amendment. Those against? Okay, that's the amendment carried. And then on that basis, then all of the other amendments, with the exception all of the other three, then of this remaining four, would then fall. Okay, they're all mutually exclusive. So on that basis, then we don't need to call any of the other amendments in relation to this. But then I want to then put the amendment. It's on to the page. That's the fifth amendment. So we're moving on then to the fifth amendment. Okay, so moving on then to the fifth amendment. I mean, I'm presuming members have it in front of them. Can I assume that there'll be a division on within the committee on this particular amendment, and then we'll get to the amendment. So members have the amendment in front of them, and this is in relation to the naming of individual developments of solar in the context of the SPA bill. Okay, so I just want to put the question: is the committee content with the proposed amendment as?
Could I just say, I have never been a councillor, but it seems to me that the member who proposed this and doesn't have a lot of faith in councils to be able to actually make decisions of their own bad, because this would then restrict councils doing all sorts of things. So it just seems to me that I think everybody around the table here, apart from myself, has been a councillor. So I think I have to say it seems to me that you don't have a lot of faith in your fellow councillors.
No, we don't. Okay. Actually, we've got a good example in Uri and Armagh.
Okay, so
yes, that is a good example.
Doing it restricts on naming, not doing.
Okay, so we have the amendment in front of us. Okay, and just a record, then I mean, this amendment was originally proposed by Jim Allister, but it's not here this morning, so was someone else formally moving the amendment? Tommy wasn't Gregory Callan. Okay, I'll just put the. Is the committee content with the proposed amendments tabled? Those in favour? Please show. Okay, those against? Okay, the motion, that amendment is carried. Okay, thank you. Moving on then to then a consequential amendment. What's that? All right, okay. Okay, so then we're in. Okay, so then I just want to then formally then put in the committee content with clause 1 subject to this agreed amendment. Those in favour? Yeah. Okay, that's a yes. Okay. So just make sure we go through that again there, because I mean these are important items. Okay. All right, folks. So given that there has been an amendment accepted by the committee, then I want to then formally ask the committee: is the committee content with clause 1 subject to the agreed amendment? Those in favour? Yes. Those against? Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm advised we'll need to take a vote on this. So do it again. that's all pay attention, please. So, is the committee content with clause 1, subject to the agreed amendment? All those in favour, please show. And those against? 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 5, 4, sorry. Okay, that's carried. Okay. So the committee accepts clause 1. No, as amended. All right. Moving on to clause 2. Okay, so is the committee content with clause 2 as drafted? Very agreed. Okay. As a committee, so therefore the committee accepts clause 2 as drafted. Clause 3, this. Okay, so is the committee content with clause 3 as drafted? Is that right?
Yeah. That's right.
Okay. Great.
Great.
Sorry, would be consequential of that one.
Yeah.
Result
Right,
of the clause 131.
Sorry.
Let's just take a second. I thought that myself, because Bernardi had that in the notes.
So where is the amendment?
To the original amendment, Henry and Bunavast, we were working on the basis there would be a consequence, but a different amendment.
So there's different consequences.
And we're being advised that the department will consider any consequences. All right? And that will be dealt with in a minute.
Okay.
All right? Clear. So we're moving on then to 4, clause 4.
Obviously, that's consequential
There
as
is the
well.
committee content with clause 4 is drafted.
It has consequences as well from clause 1, so they'll, again, the department will deal with that, is that
Yeah.
well? Okay. So do we agree it, and then the department deals with the consequences?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think clause 4 actually amends our existing legislation, our social need. Are we suggest the amendment to is only to our regeneration bill? We're not amending the social need order in 1986. So this clause is just amending the 1986 order, so there won't be a consequence.
All right. Okay, so committee contempt with clause 4 is drafted? Okay. Great, yeah, so therefore the committee accepts clause 4 as drafted, that's the record. Clause 5. Committee contempt with clause 5 is drafted? Great, yeah, the committee accepts clause 5 is drafted. I think, in terms of clause 6, the ministers agreed to amend clause 6 as part of the original committee's request. So the amendment would be after publish, insert on its website, and if you remember, people were talking about this about dissemination of information and so on. Okay, so is the committee content with clause 6 as drafted, subject to amendment as proposed by the department?
Good.
Okay, therefore, for the record, the committee accepts clause 6 subject to amendment as proposed by the department.
Good.
Okay. Clause 7, is the committee content with clause 7 as drafted? Agreed. For the record, the committee accepts clause 7 as drafted. Clause 8, committee content with clause 8 as drafted? Agreed. For the record, the committee accepts clause 8 as drafted. Okay, is the committee content with clause 9 as drafted? Agreed. Then, therefore, the committee accepts clause 9 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 10 as drafted? Agreed. The committee accepts clause 10 as drafted. Clause 11. The minister has agreed to amend clause 11 as per the committee's request, and this is in 2 parts. So we want to proceed then to 2 parts actually. Read the first proposed amendment would be to clause 11, page 7, line 37, and it's after publish, insert on its website and. Okay? So the committee content with the amendment proposed by the department. Agreed. Then the committee accepts the proposed amendment. The second proposed amendment to clause 11 is after on page 8, line 3, it's to leave out the words so published and insert first published. So is the committee content with the amendment as proposed by the department? Agreed. Okay. Then the committee accepts the proposed amendment. Is the committee content, therefore, with clause 11 subject to the agreed amendments? Agreed. Okay, and then the committee accepts clause 11 subject to the agreed amendments. Is the committee content with clause 12 as drafted? Okay, so for the record, the committee accepts clause 12 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 13 as drafted? Agreed.
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 13 as drafted. Committee content with clause 14 as drafted. Agreed. The committee accepts clause 14 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 15 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 15 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 16 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 16 as drafted. The committee content with clause 17 as drafted? Agreed.
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 17 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 18 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 18 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 19 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 19 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 20 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 20 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 21 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 21 as drafted. The committee content with clause 22 as drafted.
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 22 as drafted. Is the committee content with clause 23 as drafted?
Agreed.
The committee accepts clause 23 as drafted. Moving on then to the schedules. The committee content with schedule 1 as drafted.
Agreed.
The committee accepts schedule 1 as drafted. The committee content with schedule 2 as drafted. The committee accepts schedule 2 as drafted. The committee content with schedule 3 as drafted. The committee accepts schedule 3 as drafted. And the long title of the bill is the committee content with the long title of the bill. The committee accepts the long title as drafted. This then concludes today's clause by clause consideration of the bill. Well, there are a number of other assurances or recommendations that people want to seek or to make before we complete this section. If there aren't, I mean, obviously we can return to this, but okay, so then on that basis, no further observation or recommendation to make. Then I want the committee then just to advise the committee that we'll be asked to agree our final report on Thursday, the 28th of May. That's next Thursday. That's the last day of the committee stage of the bill. Committee officials, therefore, will circulate a draft report by 5 p.m. on this Friday for members' consideration, and the members can respond with any comment that they want to have included by noon Tuesday, 26th of May, and that would allow then the final report to be agreed on Thursday, 20th. And just a reminder, the final report must be agreed on or before the Thursday, the 20th. So that's the final deadline. Okay, members, so can I thank you, thank you, Ian, Henry, and Anthony, for your support to you this morning again to the committee. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, moving on to correspondence. We have a couple of issues here I want to draw your attention to. Page 74 of your meeting pack. Unite the Union has written to the committee expressing concerns that workers have been tupied over to the DLO when their employers go on the administration, but are still working on the terms and conditions of their former employers in some cases. And they've stated that this has resulted in a two-tier workforce within the DLO. So, but also say that we have on page 75 of your meeting pack, the department has written to the committee, and well, it was actually back in July 2014, setting out the cost of taking on additional employees to DLO as a result of contractors going into administration. And there was a fair amount of discussion around that time, if I remember correctly. Page 11 of the tabled items, members will have a written answer from the Minister, Jim Allister, which sets out the cost and amount of employed staff in the DLO. And I just want to draw your attention to the significant rise in the extent and operational cost of the DLO since 2012. So could I ask the committee to agree, given those kind of some serious figures and some serious concerns, also that we schedule a briefing from the department or the housing executive on these matters as soon as possible. Yeah. I mean, I also wanted to have addressed, because in my view there were some differences of approaches from the department, probably essentially a housing executive, in relation to some companies, some workers. Some were tupied over and some were not. And I don't just mean in terms of the people who would be tupied over as a result of the main work that they were involved in was on the contract which was affected. So, okay, so we'll ask the officials to come along here and address the issue to the members. So members content then to accept the correspondence as per the memo on page 47 of your pack.
Agreed.
Agreed. Hard work programme, page 82 of your pack. Again, just to remind members then, you have that as drafted, but again, we're also trying to remind ourselves that a consortium called Northside Regeneration was selected by the Department for Social Development in October 2014 to take forward the development initiatives of a Northside Urban Village Regeneration Implementation Plan. Now, that's a £300 million project. We've been contacted about the plans by stakeholders in the area regarding how and when it's to be taken forward, and it is a major project. Are members content then we would seek a briefing on this? Yep. Okay, thank you very much for that. One item under AOB, we have a request from Ricky Rowley. It's actually on behalf of CRISP, which is the committee representing independent supporting people providers. CRISP anagram, but anyway. And obviously we are receiving a briefing here, as recorded early on the 26th of June, or 25th of June, around supporting people. And would like to come and brief the committee before that, so can we just schedule them in one of the next couple of weeks' meetings? I'm happy enough with that. Okay, anything else under AOB? Nothing else under AOB. Okay, so meeting stands adjourned to the next meeting on Thursday, 28th of May. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.